The college football playoff semifinals are right around the corner, and we have 4 blue bloods of college football competing for the 2024 national championship. We got 25 claimed national titles between these 4 historic programs. We got a major guest on the show today. Chris Vannini from The Athletic will be joining us in a couple minutes. We are always talking ball. Tyler Noe, Lance Barton. Lance, playoff semifinals, playoff as a whole. You excited for these games? Have you been excited watching these games so far?
Yeah, man. And obviously it's college football playoffs. I know there's a lot of people out there that are just continuously complaining about blowouts and games haven't been close. And while that is true, it's been a lot of fun watching these games, seeing the first ever, 12-team playoff. Dude, the first round, seeing games like on campus. Couldn't agree more with Steve Sarkisian and old Sark when he said that, for college football, they get a lot of things right, get a lot of things wrong. They got this one right, having college football playoff games played on campus. And that Texas-Arizona State game was incredible, was awesome to watch. So, yeah, man, it's been a lot of fun. But as far as these 2 semifinal matchups, dude, first off, like you and I, being the official uniform aficionados of the sports podcast, college football podcast world, doesn't get much better than this, man, does it? As far as classic, beautiful college football uniforms, the brands, helmets, all the above with these 4 teams. I mean, come on now. And what a interesting contrast of the 2 games. Like, you've got Texas and Ohio State, the plethora of skill position players on the perimeter, at the running back position, overall, the 2 offenses that are, have quite a bit of explosive type, abilities with their skill position players. And then in the flip side of it, you've got Notre Dame and Penn State, who is obviously going to turn that game into a line of scrimmage, line up, see who can just bloody your nose type of game. It's very interesting contrast, but you have differences between the 2 games.
All right, let's welcome in our guest, Chris Vannini, senior college football writer for The Athletic and co-host of the Until Saturday podcast alongside David Ubben and Damian Harris. Chris, it's a pleasure having you on, man.
Yeah, good to be here, man.
Let's just jump right into it, man. We're excited for these semifinal matchups. We'll go in chronological order here. Kind of talk about the Orange Bowl first. That's going to be taking place 7:30, January 9th, Thursday night. You got Notre Dame versus Penn State. First things first, you hearing anything about Abdul Carter, on his availability for the game? I mean, other than him posting that Darth Vader pic on X?
Yeah, it still seems up in the air. I know James Franklin said on Saturday that they're hoping he can go, and it just kind of TBD. I don't really know. It sounded like an upper body arm type of injury, I think. That's a big one. He's maybe the best defensive player in the country. Probably is. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Boise State was able to move the ball better once he left the game. And we know that Notre Dame's offense is very run reliant, and they're going to have to win the line of scrimmage. So big player. His availability, it just at the moment, at least as of last we heard from James Franklin, is we'll see.
Yeah. To this game, though, it feels a little bit like, I know you got a wrestling background there. It feels a little bit like Undertaker versus Kane. Back in the day, just, they just want to beat the absolute heck out of each other. They want to do a lot of the same things. As far as when Notre Dame has the ball, do you think that they're going to be able to find more success on the ground with Love and Price than they did against Georgia? Obviously, Carter's status depends a lot on that.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have to, because that is what this Notre Dame offense is predicated on. I mean, they beat Georgia with 90 yards of passing. They didn't throw the ball great against Indiana either. This is not a good passing team whatsoever, and they're going to have to win the line of scrimmage. And they did against Georgia, and that was what was as impressive as anything else. I mean, how many times we see Notre Dame in a big bowl game against an SEC team and just get pushed around? I was at that Rose Bowl semifinal in Texas against Alabama. They didn't have a chance. We all remember the national championship game, the 2012 season, didn't have a chance. And they won the line of scrimmage against Georgia on both sides of the ball. That won them the game. And Penn State has one of the best defensive lines in the country. depending on if Abdul Carter's there. So they're going to have to, because they're going to run the ball. They are like the number 1 or 2 rushing team in the country, I think, based on yards per carry. So that's what it comes down to if Notre Dame's going to have a chance.
Yeah. When you look at Riley Leonard, he's not your traditional quarterback, obviously, 90 yards passing, like you just mentioned. Looking at him and Drew Aller, which quarterback would you trust? Who's more trustworthy in this game?
That is tough, because I don't know if any of the quarterbacks left in the playoff are trustworthy. And you look at these two guys, neither of them are like breakout guys. Like, both of these teams are very, very low nationally in explosive plays in the passing game. Starting with Riley Leonard, we know he's just generally not efficient, but he's a really, really good runner, and he's really, really good at avoiding sacks. Even when he's not scrambling, if he's not taking off and running, if he's just scrambling, avoiding sacks, really, really good, like Tom Brady-esque almost. And then he doesn't slide when he runs anymore, because he doesn't know how to slide. He basically just jumps forward or gets tackled. And that's going to be a gigantic part of this running game. In that sense, like, he's not turning the ball over a ton because he's not throwing it a ton. Drew Aller for Penn State, like, you watch him and there'll be like 3 or 4 passes and you're like, oh, that's like NFL level type. And you see the talk from NFL people saying, like, I know Drew Aller said he's coming back next year, but if he has a really good playoff, he may go pro, because there are not a lot of good quarterbacks in this class. And you'll see those touchdown passes he threw to Tyler Warren against Boise State. And then you'll see like an open 3rd down pass that he misses. And you're just like, how do you miss that throw, And so you can see it in flashes, but the best part about Drew Aller is he doesn't throw interceptions. He doesn't put the ball where it's not supposed to be. So I trust him to not give you a killer play. But are you going to get the plays you need to get? I don't know. If I had to pick between the two, I guess Riley Leonard, because he's in more control and it's kind of more on him. But if you get a good day from Drew Aller, Penn State could win it all.
Yeah, and Chris, to that point, just talking about Riley Leonard and really both of these teams, if perimeter play at the receiver position is people's types of game, this is not their type of game. This game is absolutely going to be played in a phone booth and at the line of scrimmage. So with that being said, like, why are teams not stacking the box against Notre Dame and against their run game and Riley Leonard? Like, there were multiple times throughout that Georgia game where I was curious as to why they didn't have more hats in the box to try to stop them up front.
Well, I wonder if part of it is Georgia thought they maybe didn't need to, that they are, really talented, really gigantic on the inside in a way that very few teams are, but didn't work. Notre Dame didn't run the ball amazing in that game, but the key in that game was Notre Dame allowed 1 tackle for loss the whole game.
Yep.
They were never behind the change. And that was the problem with Georgia. Georgia allowed 4 sacks, I think 9 TFLs. So they were constantly off balance. Suddenly you're in a passing situation. Notre Dame was just constantly chugging along. And so for whatever reason, Georgia couldn't get those negative plays. And I think that's what Penn State is going to have to do. They're going to have to probably blitz more. They're going to have to get you in 3rd and 10s and more stuff like that, because Notre Dame didn't really get there. They were always on schedule. So, Notre Dame has some talented receivers. They went through the portal and got some guys, but it really hasn't been a part of their game this year. So will Penn State put more guys in the box? Potentially. We just saw them do that against Ashton Genty, and they slowed him down. So I imagine a pretty similar type of plan is going to be there. You're just going to have to account for quarterback run a lot more than you did before.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, with the Notre Dame defense, I've been seeing some, guys breaking down film of Notre Dame on Twitter and stuff, and they were talking about how Notre Dame played a lot of cover 1 against Georgia. They were putting their very talented corners on islands against the Georgia receivers, because obviously the Georgia receivers just aren't that talented, and they were really bracketing the tight end position for Georgia with their talented safeties and linebackers. You got to think. Don't you think that's going to be kind of the game plan in this one too, with the lack of explosive receivers that Penn State has? And obviously, arguably the best player on the field for either team in this game is Tyler Warren, tight end for Penn State.
Yeah, I think Warren has more catches and targets than everybody else combined on the team, I think. Yeah, you're gonna have to bracket them. Like that's what you're gonna have to do. And Boise State didn't do that because Boise State had to blitz every other play, or else they were not going to get pressure on Drew Aller. And their defense is predicated on that. They were really high in sacks and they were really high in allowing explosive plays. So that was what you were going to get from Boise State. Notre Dame is going to be a little bit different. They've got they lost Riley Mills against Indiana, their best defensive lineman, their sack leader. And they still got 4 sacks against Georgia. I mean, imagine if he was playing. They lost one of their All-American corners earlier in the season, and they still got really good talent. Like, this defense is legit. It's deep in a way that we have not seen in a very long time. And credit to Marcus Freeman and everybody on that staff. But yeah, that is essentially the game plan I would expect to see from Notre Dame. Bracket Tyler Warren, everybody else single coverage, because I don't think Penn State has the receivers that exactly scare you. And I'll be curious, Drew Aller in the quarterback run game as well. He doesn't do it a ton, but he scrambles pretty well. Picks up some 3rd and longs. Did that a couple of times against SMU. But yeah, I think the Notre Dame game plan is pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, and I know that I was listening to another show this week. I was listening to Cole Kubelik talk about it on McElroy and Kubelik, that Cole Kubelik talked to defensive coordinator Al Golden before the game, and he was talking about like some of like throwing the ball to the running back out of the backfield was something that they were a little bit worried about in this game, more so than anything in the passing game. And obviously they ended up scoring a touchdown on that. Georgia did with the wheel route with the running back out of the backfield. Penn State does that really well with Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton. Actually, Tyler and I were at the Big Ten championship game, and they really were opening that up against Oregon.
Yep.
I got to imagine, like, do you think that that's something that Penn State goes to in this game, is using the backs out of the backfield a lot in the passing game?
Yeah, they didn't do that a bunch against Boise State, again, because I think they needed the running backs back there for pass protection because you knew the blitzes were coming. Penn State also, if you watch that game, they were running all over Boise State. And offense coordinator Andy Kolnicki was getting too cute. There were several situations when you're just yelling at your TV screen, just like, run the ball, man. What are you doing? Both of those running backs, I think, had like 6 or 7 yards of carry in that game.
Especially in the third quarter.
Yeah. So we'll see. But that's not new. The same thing happened against SMU. I was at the Penn State SMU game. And if you talk to Penn State fans, they'll tell you the same thing. You talk to Kansas fans when Andy Kolnicki was the OC there. It's the same thing. It's like sometimes he just does a little too much. And when something is working, just stick with that. Now, I don't think Penn State's going to be able to average 6 or 7 yards per carry against Notre Dame, but will he stick with what is working, or will he try to do too much and it'll cost you a drive, or it'll be a 3rd and short and they call a pass instead of a run and it's a messy play and then you're punting on that drive? Like, how many wasted drives is Penn State going to have? I think that is something to watch. But running backs out of the backfield, yeah, it's certainly a possibility. Both those guys are really good at catching the ball.
Yeah, we got to talk about James Franklin. Obviously, he's had his struggles as an underdog against ranked teams. The reality of the situation is that he's probably going to make some questionable decisions during this game that fans are not going to like, due to it being a big game, a close game, whatever you want to say. At least that's the perception that people get. I know they got wins over SMU and Boise State, but how badly does James Franklin and Penn State need to win this game?
It's interesting because Marcus Freeman was kind of in the same spot, which was getting to the playoff and hosting a first-round game was the expectation. And you did that, and you beat Indiana. How much does beating Indiana count? Yeah, we can debate blah, blah, blah about that. But when you beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, then it's like, okay, Marcus Freeman, he's got it. There's that big stamp victory. I don't think Penn State has that yet because SMU and Boise State, whatever you think of them, I think they're both good teams, but Penn State has more talent. Yep. And with James Franklin, he'll always win you the games when he has more talent. Honestly, Kirby Smart's the same way. And Kirby Smart's kind of have the similar issue where his record against teams of equal or greater talent is not that great. That's why his record against Alabama is what it is. But James Franklin, if he's got the better team, he'll win. And that's what's happened through 2 games. Do they have the better team against Notre Dame? I don't know. I think they're probably about even. Notre Dame's about a 1-point favorite. So if you lose this game, you can say, hey, you made the playoff, you won 2 games, you made the semifinals. But you lost to Ohio State, you lost to Oregon, you lost to Notre Dame. Where is the signature win of that season? Is it Illinois? I mean, again, you're the better team. So, James Franklin's a really good coach. Penn State is in a good position with him. But if you lose to Notre Dame, I don't know if that big game question goes away. And you've got a few coaches like that. I think Dan Lanning is kind of in that situation too. So if James Franklin wins this game, I think that's done. I think that goes away regardless of what happens in the national championship. So it's a big game for him.
Yeah, just give us, to finish off your keys to the game, kind of just tell us how each team can win this game.
I think Notre Dame, it's stay ahead of the chains. Don't get those negative plays. Don't allow sacks. Don't put yourself in those bad positions. Like the Notre Dame fans got mad at me for saying this, but like Georgia could have won that game. Like it was right there. You don't fumble in the red zone. You don't give up that sack deep in your own territory right before halftime. You don't give up a kick return touchdown. That's 17 to 21 points right there. But like that is what football comes down to. A couple of big plays in big moments. And Notre Dame, most of the season, has made those big plays in every single moment. That's why they're a good team. That's why they were the better team. Can they do that here against Penn State? Which one is going to do it? If you're staying ahead of the chains, third and shorts, in getting pressure with your defensive line, that's what you're going to have to do. Just avoid the negative plays. And for Penn State, I think you're going to have to hit some big plays, whether that's in the passing game or the running game. I don't know if Penn State can dink and dunk as much down the field because their play calling is going to mess something up along the way anyway. So I think this is much like the Sugar Bowl. I mean, this is going to be a line of scrimmage game. Two really good teams on the line. Typically, who wins the line of scrimmage wins. Notre Dame won it against Georgia. We'll see against Penn State.
Well, now we're going to move on here, Chris, to the other semifinal game, the Cotton Bowl, which will be played in Dallas on Friday night between the Buckeyes and the Longhorns, Texas and Ohio State. Another fantastic, classic uniform helmet matchup here in this matchup. I love it. Tyler and I are big uniform aficionados here.
Of course, me too.
But yeah, Chris, I guess since Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, they no longer seem to be twisted up like a pretzel mentally from Michigan, and they're actually unleashing their just freak athletes and elite skill players in space against defenses, and nobody can seem to stop it. They look completely unstoppable in these first two matchups at the playoffs. What can Texas do to limit the damage and avoid the Buckeye offense just going off like it has against Tennessee and Oregon?
I mean, if Ohio State plays like it has played the last two games, they're winning it all. They are the most talented team in college football. I predicted before the season they were going to go 16-0 and win it all because there have been very rare teams in college football history with that amount of depth and veteran talent across the board. There were no weaknesses on this team. And yet, like, for much of the season, it was like, like you could see it in spurts. I mean, they didn't even like Marshall and Western Michigan. They didn't dominate in the way you would kind of expect. They were getting off to slow starts. They lose to Oregon. They, could have won that game. Could have gone either way. But you beat Penn State on the road. You handle Indiana. It's like, yeah, but it's like, I feel like we still haven't seen what this team can be and what we know it can be. And then the loss to Michigan just woke them up. And they were just like, F it. We're going to just air it out. We're going to throw to set up the run, which is what they should have been doing all along because they can't run in short yarded situations because the offensive line is banged up. And boom, there you go. And Oregon and Tennessee have no idea what the heck hit them. So if you're Texas, again, line of scrimmage. Ohio State had 8 sacks against Oregon. Oregon had allowed 5 sacks total the previous 2 years, each of the previous 2 years. Like, they just destroyed them on that line. And even that banged-up offensive line dominated the line again, gave Will Howard time to find Jeremiah Smith and get open. If you can't get pressure on Will Howard, Ibuka, Jeremiah Smith, these guys are going to get open if they've got time. And so you're going to have to get pressure. That's where it's going to start. Texas has been weird. Like, the defense is the strength of their team. The defense has not been good in the playoff. Like, Arizona State continually moved the ball on them. Clemson consistently moved the ball on them. So, I don't know. This is a really interesting matchup.
Yeah, to that point, that was kind of where I was going to go next. Is like, I don't know what's happened to this Texas defense who has elite playmakers at every level of the defense. I mean, they've got the guy that won the best DB of the year. They've got multiple D linemen that can get after the quarterback and get tackles for a loss. Anthony Hill Jr. is an elite middle linebacker. And then, like you mentioned, the Clemson game, they get Cade Klubnik and those receivers throw all over them. And then Scatterbo runs all over them in the second half.
And throws on them.
Yeah, exactly. And throws on them. I mean, it's interesting because I'm of the belief that I do think that Texas does have the horses on defense to be able to possibly apply some pressure on Howard and possibly slow down that running game. But like you said, if they continue to just play like they've played, I don't know how anybody's going to stop them.
I was at the Texas-Georgia game in Austin, and Texas fell behind very quickly in that game because of some turnovers and some really bad field position. Their offensive line got dominated by Georgia's front. And Georgia's front is like pretty good, but not like what it was. And it feels like a situation with Texas where, kind of like Penn State, if they are more talented than you, they're going to run all over you. And they will win that line of scrimmage. But when they've gone up against a Georgia and a team with similar talent level, it has not gone well. And I think that's what we've seen so far. So I don't know. This is kind of one of those, like, see what you really got, Texas. Yeah, you can beat up on Arkansas and Vanderbilt and Florida and all this stuff. But in the big games, the Georgia game and stuff like that, their defense it's not been there.
Yeah, well, we've actually talked about that too, Chris, about how, like, last year, I mean, really dating back to last year, as far as the biggest games that Texas has been in against the best competition, the last one that they won was in Tuscaloosa early in the year last year at Alabama. And ironically, that's the last time that Texas was an underdog, was at Alabama last year.
You can tell that's a good, but that point, you can tell Steve Sarkisian loves that they're the underdog, by the way. He said in his press conference the other day, like, nobody thinks we're going to win. Like, people are, like, he's really, I think they are really glad that people are doubting them now, because now he's got that motivation. That doesn't always come when you're at Texas. You're Texas. You're the flagship school. Like, you're expected to win. So to be in that position again, finally, for the first time since Alabama, I think they are very happy about that.
Yeah, I think you could arguably say, I mean, we know Ohio State, like you mentioned earlier, is the most talented team in the country, but it's arguably that Texas is the second most talented team in the country across the board on both sides of the ball. Moving to the other side of the ball, to the offensive side. Sark, one of the best play callers in the game, has been for a while, but Tyler and I talk about it all the time. Quinn Ewers and this Texas offense in general, there's so many games where they leave you just with more to be desired. Like, they should be doing more with the athletes that they've got on the perimeter, with the multiple backs that they've got, great offensive line, solid quarterback in Ewers. I mean, what do you think is contributing to Texas offense being so inconsistent, especially here late in the season? I mean, they dominated in the run game against Texas A&M and Clemson, but couldn't run the rock against Georgia or Arizona State. I just, don't understand what's going on there.
I mean, that's where it starts, the running game. Like, do they have it or do they not? And it's been very, very hit or miss. They lost a couple of running backs in the preseason, and they've had games where they've been amazing on the ground and games when they've been terrible on the ground. And it's rarely in between. And that doesn't help Quinn Ewers when you don't have a good running game to go with that. So that's where it starts. They've had some injuries in the offensive line. Kelvin Banks has been in and out. The right tackle, Cam Williams, I think he missed the last game, or at least he got hurt in the first game. I think he was in and out. So that's where it starts. How healthy is your offensive line against what is a very, very good Ohio State defensive line? If you can run the ball, you're in it. If you can't, if Texas can't run the ball in this game, I don't see how they win, because I don't know if Quinn Ewers has the ability to win you the game. And I think, Quinn is probably more banged up than they let on. He had that oblique injury in the middle of the season, and ever since then, he's not had zip on the throws like he used to. It never came back. And then he injured the ankle late in the season as well. So I think he's probably a bit banged up. I'm surprised we haven't seen more Arch Manning packages. We saw a little against Texas A&M, a little against Georgia at the SEC Championship, but like not more. And they haven't necessarily needed to, because the offense has done like okay. But then you see what happens at the end of the Arizona State game. 4th and 13. Quinn Ewers checks into the max protection and makes the throw that saves the game, and they win. Like, that's why Sark still rides with him, because this guy knows his offense inside and out, and you can trust him to do all those little things. So it starts with running the ball. If they can't run the ball, I don't see Texas having a chance.
Yeah, I think on the Ohio State side of the ball, there's not, obviously, after the last two games, there hasn't been too many question marks. I've been Kind
How
of
many like I don't remember how many sacks they got against Tennessee, but they were constantly all over Nico in that first game. Like the defensive line in these first 2 CFP games has been unrelenting.
Yeah,
I said the last episode. I mean, Jack Sawyer, JTT. I mean, Cody Simon looks like the best linebacker in football the past 2 games. Like they are finally, because that defensive line, even in the first matchup against Oregon, they were just so hit or miss on whether or not they were going to be able to get any pressure.
Yep. There was a stat. I mean, there was like, but after that Oregon game, sorry to interrupt you, but there was a stretch of like of Ohio State's like last like 4 or 5 games against top 5 teams. I think they had 1 sack or something like that. Like the defensive line in the big games was not showing up. Defensive line coach Larry Johnson was getting a lot of heat from fans because they weren't showing up in those big games, and now they are. Now they've been unbelievable. And if that is going, good luck.
Yeah, they had 13 tackles for a loss. You mentioned 8 sacks against Oregon. They had 13 tackles for a loss in that game, too.
I think it's like negative 20-something rushing yards is what Oregon ended up with.
Yeah, it was nuts.
Yeah, and I've been dogging on Will Howard kind of all season. Just, a lot of comparisons to him and Kyle McCord, obviously with the season McCord put up at Syracuse and how he got kind of run out of there, blamed, for the loss last year. But Howard has showed up big time in the playoffs. He's got a QBR of over 98 between the 2 games. He's averaging over 300 per game now. They're finally opening up the offense. He is going to go against kind of on paper what is, obviously Lance, said the DB of the year and a good secondary, but
yeah, Jahdae Barron.
We saw what Cade Klubnik did to him. And you got to think that Will Howard and just kind of how they're rolling, he's going to duplicate that.
Yeah, I mean, Texas's pass defense, I think, is statistically like number 1 in the country, but like you watch the Arizona State game, like Sam Leavitt was probably the better quarterback in that game. Mm-hmm. And Arizona State was constantly moving into.
He's a dog.
He was constantly moving into. They'd get inside the 40-yard line and then they'd sputter. And I'm curious about Texas with that too, because Texas's red zone offense is not good, and you can't be kicking field goals in this game. You're going to finish drives. But Will Howard. Ohio State, like he was their guy from the beginning in the portal last year. Like there wasn't like a whole process of who we're going to figure out. Like they wanted him. He was the guy because Kansas State was moving on to Avery Johnson. And I mean, Will Howard has been really good this season. If you look at the numbers, the accuracy, the completion percentage, I want to say he has like 4 or 5 games over 70 or 80% completions. It's there. It was there in the Penn State game, but he also threw an interception, a pick 6, in that game. So in the biggest moments, he hadn't yet really like taken over a game himself. And now they have. And I really think it's because they're passing to set up the run and they're letting Will Howard do his thing. And then the running game is complementing that and it's opening everything up. And they're giving him and they're protecting him. I mean, the offensive line was destroyed against Michigan because they had just lost their starting center, I think, that week, on top of having a couple of guys gone. So that was maybe a really bad time to lose your center going up against Michigan that week. But the offensive game plan now is just clearly different, and they're utilizing his strengths. He feels great. He's been a really good player this season, and now he's been a great player. And if you get that kind of play out of Will Howard, again, you're probably winning it all.
Yeah, one might say that Chip Kelly and Ryan Day was really holding him back this year, letting him be more of a game manager, and then they finally turn him loose here in the playoffs. I saw a stat the other day, guys, that he's like 7 of 9 in these first 2 games in the playoffs on throws of 20-plus yards downfield. That's like that travel more than 20 air yards. That's insane so far. Well,
yeah,
Chris, tell us, man, what do you think each of these teams need to do to win this game?
Texas, you got to run the ball. And Ohio State, just got to avoid turnovers, avoid negative plays. Don't set up Texas in good field position and stuff like that. Ohio State's favored by I think 6 or 6.5.
Yep, 6.5.
I'm picking Ohio State. I had picked Oregon to win it all, so now I got to change it up. But I mean, Ohio State, if they play like they've been playing, nobody's beating them.
Right.
But we'll see. Orange Bowl, Notre Dame, stay ahead of the chains, avoid the negative plays, do that. Penn State, I think you're going to have to hit some big plays. Find Tyler Warren downfield for 20, 30 yards, and Drew Allen make a couple of big runs and stuff like that. The games usually come down to line of scrimmage and big plays, whether that's a special teams return. I mean, Notre Dame special teams have been really, really good in these playoffs. They were the worst kicking team in the country coming into the playoffs. Part of that was because of injuries. But their kicker is like 5 for 6 or 4 for 5 in the playoff. He made 3 over 40 yards against Georgia. I mean, if they get that kind of special teams play, because Notre Dame has little margin for error with how they play. Mm-hmm. And so if they get a turnover, turn it into a touchdown. If they make a field goal, get a kick return, like that type of stuff. Penn State's got to hit those big plays because Notre Dame has been making just enough big plays and not allowing any of them. That's how they've been winning. But I'm picking Notre Dame. I think they're favored by like 1.5. It's a tough one. Could really easily see both of them, but Notre Dame, for whatever reason, they just have it. You know, they make the plays when you need to make the plays to win the game. And so I'm going to go with Notre Dame and Ohio State.
Okay. Chris, can't thank you enough, man, for coming on, discussing these 2 semifinal matchups that are sure to be great games this week. Let the people know one more time where they can find you online, where they can read and listen to your stuff.
Yep, theathletic.com for all of our very deep college football playoff coverage there. The Until Saturday podcast with me, David Ubben, and former Alabama running back Damian Harris. And at Chris Vannini on pretty much any social media that you use.
Awesome. Can't thank you enough again, man. Had a lot of fun talking about it. Let's do it again soon.
Thanks, Chris.
Yep, thanks, guys.
Man, that was fantastic. You know, loved having Chris on. That was awesome that he took time to come just talk some ball with us, talk some semifinal action with us. Love what some of his takes and what he had to say in regards to the games. You know, obviously he was big on talking about the line of scrimmage play and who's going to make the least amount of mistakes, which obviously is what happens when you have bigger games like this, when you have opponents, especially in the Notre Dame-Penn State game where not much separates the two opponents from each other. Usually comes down to who can make the explosive plays, who can prevent the other from making explosive plays, who can win the line of scrimmage, and who's going to force mistakes and make the least amount of mistakes. And guys, seriously, like if you're not following Chris on X, you need to do that. You also need to go check out his work at The Athletic. I mean, his articles are fantastic. The guy is just he's a ball knower, well-versed in the college football world. But we were lucky and blessed to have him come on and just chop it up with us here today, weren't we, Tyler?
Yes, sir. It was pretty awesome. How about you and I chop it up a little bit on these games here? Let's start off with the Orange Bowl. Yeah, we got Notre Dame, Penn State. Notre Dame right now is 1.5-point favorite. Taking place on Thursday night, 7:30 p.m. So we got an earlier kickoff. We love that here on the East Coast, as always. Since 2019, Penn State with the rest advantage is 10-1 straight up. So they got the rest advantage in this game. Obviously, you know they got to kick their feet up for 2 days and watch Notre Dame and Georgia just pound each other on January 2nd. However, Notre Dame with a rest disadvantage since 2019. So getting less time off because everybody likes to schedule a bye week before they play Notre Dame. Notre Dame's 21-2 with a rest disadvantage. Okay. Obviously, they just won with Georgia having more time off too. So they're no stranger to this position. I don't think that's an advantage for either team really. So not really a leg up for Penn State. Marcus Freeman, we talked about it earlier this year. Neutral site games. Marcus Freeman's 9-0. Hasn't lost a game at a neutral site as the official head coach of Notre Dame. He started off his career coaching the Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma State. You know, he kind of jumped in there as a head coach. They lost that game, but kind of as the official head coach starting in 2022, he hasn't lost a game at a neutral site, and he's 28-5 straight up when they are listed as a favorite. Obviously, we know the struggles of Penn State. James Franklin, 7-25 as an underdog while he's at Penn State, and 16-27 against ranked opponents. So a lot at stake here for both these coaches, a lot at stake here for both these programs. Notre Dame obviously has been to the playoff, and they've been to a national championship more recently than Penn State. Penn State has not been here in a long time. Like this is, I mean, since the 80s, maybe the early 90s, this is foreign territory for Penn State.
Yeah, it's no secret, man. I mean, I know Penn State fans get tired of hearing about it, and some talk about it themselves. Like when we were at the Big Ten championship game in Indy, like talking to some of the fans there at the sports bar before the game, and in Lucas Oil there. I mean, there's some that obviously talk about it there too. I mean, James Franklin in big games. I know we've had a few people get frustrated with us, like, oh, well, now all of a sudden SMU's not a big game and Boise's not a big game. That's not what we're saying. Those are big games, yes. But this game, this is the type of game that, like you just alluded to it in some of those numbers that you gave out, when he's an underdog, when the deck of cards is stacked evenly or slightly against him, these are the games he loses.
That's exactly what Chris said when we were just talking to him. I mean, he just said when they have more talent, they win the games. It's plain and simple.
Yep. So this is the type of game that he needs to prove to the silence the naysayers. And we're not saying we're naysayers. We're just talking about he needs to silence the naysayers, silence whatever you want to call them, haters, whatever. And like Penn State fans that doubt him in these bigger games, we all know what's going to happen. If they are to lose this game, the college football media world and fans, even of Penn State and stuff, they're going to immediately go to, yep, see, there's James Franklin again, can't win the bigger games and the games against the best opponents. That's exactly what the narrative will be. And Marcus Freeman, on the flip side of that, like you've talked about, like he's been really good against ranked opponents in his time at Notre Dame and his limited time he's been at Notre Dame. It's the games against Northern Illinois, or the games against Marshall, or the games against Stanford last year, where he's a huge favorite that for whatever reason he has found ways to lose those games. The bigger games so far that he's been in, he's found ways to win those games. At Texas A&M earlier this year, first game of the year, against Georgia, and as you called it, the Sugar Dome. I love that, by the way, if you can't tell. I'm not even making fun of you. I legit like that better than the Superdome. But that marquee, push you over the top, get the rest of the world talking about what a superstar type coach you could be moving forward and launch your career trajectory, all that stuff. That is what Marcus Freeman just did against Georgia. James Franklin obviously been doing it a lot longer. He needs this win from a public perception standpoint, in my opinion, more than Marcus Freeman does. Just because, again, of how people view him in regards to games that he's either an underdog in or it's an extremely close spread like this, not taking anything away from winning 2 college football playoff games against SMU and Boise. But 2 things can be true, again, at the same time. Those were big games that he won in the college football playoff games, but this is the type of game he needs to win to prove other people wrong. Yep. And he's got a hell of a team, man, to do it. Do you agree or disagree with that as far as that take?
That he's got a good team to do it?
Sorry, no, the back on in the deal of like James Franklin and like needing this win probably more perception wise than Marcus Freeman.
Oh yeah. And I mean, Freeman's been doing it for 3 years, right? He's got everyone. He just got extended. He'll have more chances, obviously. And Franklin is getting up there. He's been at Penn State for 10 years now. So I think this might be his 11th season. So he's and he hasn't been to the playoff yet. Obviously, they play Ohio State and Michigan every year. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about. They cannot get over the hump against Ohio State and Michigan. When they did beat Ohio State, they went to the Big Ten Championship and won. They still got beat out because they lost earlier in the year against Pittsburgh. So it just hasn't lined up for Penn State this year, in James Franklin's tenure. So let's dive into the matchup a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk about when Notre Dame has the ball, right? When Notre Dame's offense is out there versus Penn State's defense, you got the number 3 scoring offense versus number 5 scoring defense versus FBS opponents. So people want to talk about Notre Dame. I think you even mentioned on the last episode before the Georgia game, they want to take the air out of the ball with those long, slogging drives. They're actually number 2 in points per play. And obviously that has something to do with, some of the schedule they played and some of the weaker opponents they played. But against Army, Navy, USC, they had a lot of big play, big strike ability. And they have that in that offense. But against, Texas A&M and against Georgia, and most likely against Penn State, that's where they transform back into the team that wants to run the ball. I just think that drive against Georgia in the fourth quarter with 9 minutes to go, was probably one of their most impressive drives of the year. They didn't even score, but Georgia knew what they were going to do. They knew they were going to run the ball at them, and Georgia just couldn't stop them. And you had the offensive line leaning on them in the fourth quarter, just like they did against Texas A&M in week 1. So from week 1 to just now, it's been the same story for Notre Dame.
Yeah, in these bigger games, it really is. It seems like it's more of like a heavyweight fight. They're standing in the middle of the ring, trading punches with one another, and which one's going to break first. You just said it. Like, you were at that game, first game of the year of Notre Dame at Texas A&M. In that fourth quarter, Notre Dame's offensive line, it was obvious that Texas A&M's defensive front started giving out against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame was able to run the football in the fourth quarter. Notre Dame in the fourth quarter against Georgia, like late in that game, Georgia knew they were going to be running the ball every play. Couldn't, like you just said, couldn't stop it there in the fourth quarter. Couldn't get them off the field because Notre Dame's offensive line had been leaning on them the whole game. And so that's the type of game I expect in this Penn State game in regards to the style of game that's going to be played. It's going to be a heavyweight fight, standing in the middle of the ring, trading punches with one another. Again, we talked about it with Chris. Got to know the status of Abdul Carter.
Yeah.
I mean, he's arguably the best defensive player in college football, like Chris said. Elite edge rusher. Dude, we were there at the Big Ten championship game, and you and I both left our seat. It was funny. People around us were almost like, what are these guys getting that excited about? Noah Whittington, the second-string tailback for Oregon, is a jitterbug. Dude is fast as can be on that field. And he went one way and changed directions and went the opposite way of the field. And Abdul Carter was on the same side where he was changing direction to go the other way. And Abdul Carter ran him down from behind.
Yeah.
And you and I both came out of our seat, and we both looked at the same time, were freaking out, like, for the same reason. Like, we couldn't believe a man that size that just ran that fast to run down Noah Whittington like that.
Yeah, there's a reason he wears number 11.
Yeah, he wears the sticks. He wears the sticks for Penn State for a reason. It's so much cooler.
He's top 10 pick in the NFL draft for sure, right?
Yes, absolutely. Like, he's a difference maker. He's in a year this year where there's not as many difference making, like, true NFL, like those speedy edge rushers. That's what Abdul Carter is, and he's also powerful as well.
Well, when you talk about Notre Dame, like, running the ball, I mean, they're number 2 in yards per carry. Penn State's number 8 in, defending the run. Obviously, Jeremiah Love over 1,000 yards. Jadarian Price averaging 6.8 yards per carry. And then you got Riley Leonard throwing in 750 yards rushing there too. I would expect Abdul Carter to do a lot of spying on Riley Leonard this game.
Yeah, I would too. And the only thing about what that is, though, you're kind of picking your poison. If you do that, you're definitely taking away your most elite pass rusher. Now, I know Kobe King's a good pass rusher as well, and Danny Dennis Sutton's a really good pass rusher too, and is able to get he's not your same style of, like, edge rusher, but he's able to get pressure on the quarterback too. But yeah, I would imagine that there will be some times that they will spy with Carter. I'm curious if Penn State believes that they can play Notre Dame more like straight up with their front. I'm sure they believe in their defensive front enough to where maybe they don't have to spy with Carter. I mean, maybe they spy with Kobe King. I mean, he's also elite with his speed and at his size on the defensive side of the ball for Penn State. But maybe they don't waste their most elite pass rusher and the best pass rusher in college football as a spy. Because if they're doing that, that's almost a win for Notre Dame. If they're causing the other team to take their best pass rusher and turn him into a spy as opposed to rushing after the quarterback. But I get your point. Like, it's like, what are we scared of more? Leonard beating us in the passing game or him beating us in the run game?
Well, that's the thing. Like, I mean, Riley Leonard, it's easier said than done to spy him too, because like Jake said a couple weeks ago when he was on the show, he is a sneaky fast runner. Like, and you saw it at times in that Georgia game where he went straight up the middle one time and a dude was right in front of him and he just kind of put a little move on him, and it wasn't a big move at all, but just kind of put a little move on him and just kind of shoved him off to the side and ended up running for 25 yards. So he is a sneaky runner. He's more dangerous with his legs than his arms this year, probably in his entire career too. Like, Notre Dame's bread and butter is not their passing game. Penn State's pass defense is very solid, but
yeah, they've got two really good corners. And you got to imagine I think Penn State's going to come out. They're not going to commit any extra bodies in the passing game. I think they'll put their corners on islands with Notre Dame's receiving core, and they're going to try to play this game in the box because they know that that's what Notre Dame's going to want to do. It just boils down to, Penn State is like for 7 turnovers. Penn State is for 7 turnovers in this playoff so far. They're +5 in the turnover margin. Notre Dame is number 2 in the country in turnover margin. They're like +18 on the year in the turnover margin.
Yeah.
So Notre Dame doesn't turn the ball over a lot. Riley Leonard is more of a game manager, smart type quarterback. He's not going to sit there and put the ball tons of times in harm's way. Can Penn State do what they've done in these first 2 playoff games and find ways to get extra possessions for their offense? Because it really is going to come down to, like, far as who makes the most mistakes.
Yeah.
So
I was going to say Notre Dame plays a clean game. They're going to have to against the Penn State defense that averages 1.6 takeaways per game. They had 4 against Boise. The offense is going to have to play a clean game. On the other side of the ball, Penn State, when they got the ball, it's number 2 or number 19 scoring offense versus the number 2 scoring defense. Obviously, we just saw Notre Dame shut down Georgia's rushing attack. And they're definitely going to have their work cut out for them against Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, who both have over 1,000 yards rushing this year. They're averaging, together, the whole team is 5.3 yards per carry.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be, I think, the main focus for Notre Dame's defense in this game.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny to say this, but like, dude, Penn State's rushing attack and Notre Dame's, but Penn State's, as far as like Notre Dame in this matchup, who they're facing, a lot better than what Georgia's was this year. Georgia's rushing game this year was borderline almost non-existent compared to what Georgia's rushing offenses of the past were. Allen and Singleton, different animal. Kotelnicki's done it everywhere he's been as far as the rushing offenses that he's had. I talked to you before the season, went back and looked at what he did at Wisconsin Whitewater and Buffalo and Kansas. I mean, he's always had a prolific running game. And obviously taking over at Penn State when you've got 2 horses like this with Allen and Singleton doesn't hurt. But again, you've got Love and Price with Notre Dame. We don't really know the status yet of Love. But then you've got Singleton and Allen with Penn State. Notre Dame, like receivers, they're solid. They're fine, but they're not going to be the type of receivers that's going to necessarily just, that you're losing sleep over at night. Penn State, same thing.
Yeah.
And Penn State, it comes down to Allen, Singleton, and obviously Tyler Warren. What is Notre Dame's plan against that? Now, we're definitely not your X's and O's, deep dive into X's and O's type podcast, but obviously we do our research and do, our own studies and stuff when we come here to talk ball with you guys. And Tyler and I did some deep dives into it and seen some of your X's and O's gurus talking about this. But Notre Dame pretty much against Georgia for the majority of the game ran a cover 1, robber type of defense against them, which they were just matching up their corners against against Georgia's receivers, man to man, and they were taking safeties and linebackers and basically bracketing the tight ends because Georgia does like to use Oscar Delp and that crew in the tight ends. Obviously, Penn State wants to use Tyler Warren in that. According to these X's and O's gurus, that's a lot of what Ohio State did to Penn State earlier this year. They put their corners on islands with Penn State's receivers, and they were bracketing Tyler Warren. Now, if it was as easy as just saying, we're just going to bracket Tyler Warren, we think we can shut him down. Again, man, Kotelnicki will find ways to line Tyler Warren up. That is what I think the unique thing that they do with him. They've lined him up at center from the tight end. They've lined him up at quarterback. They line him up at tailback. They line him up in the slot. They line him up in the line of scrimmage as far as your traditional tight end way. Line him up at receiver. They do a lot of different things with him. So it's not as easy, in my opinion, as just going out there and saying we're just going to bracket this guy because he doesn't line up usually in the traditional tight end way. So what is Notre Dame going to do to stop Singleton, and Allen in the passing game? Because I do think they're going to use them in the passing game more. And what is their game plan for Tyler Warren?
Yeah, it's the Ohio State comp is pretty good on the defensive side
Mhm.
because Notre Dame's got the safeties back there who can do it with the Don Schuler and Xavier Watts. And like you said, like both sides of the ball, the wide receivers aren't scaring these defenses. So Christian Gray and freshman Leonard Moore are going to be put on islands out there, and I think they're fine with that. They've done that. They did that against USC a
Yeah.
lot, right? And so they're good with that.
This is the best rushing attack, but for really both teams, as far as the style. Like Notre Dame with the three-headed monster of two really good tailbacks and the quarterback position from Riley Leonard, best rushing attack Penn State's faced.
Yeah, yeah.
Same thing on the other side. I think this is the best. I know that Notre Dame played Army and Navy and stuff, but as far as like at the Power Four level, traditional style, like tough run game to stop. I mean, again, Aller can move a little bit. He's shown that he can do some things in the run game too. Not as obviously much as Leonard, but he's shown he can do a little bit. But the two-headed monster of Allen and Singleton, and I mean, too, man, we got to mention it. I mean, Notre Dame just played a physical war with Georgia, and Penn State's had extra time off, and obviously didn't play the same physical war against Boise. Again, Boise, made some things happen in that game, but it's not like going up against a Kirby Smart Georgia team.
Penn State probably hasn't played a physical game since that Ohio State game. I mean, like a really physical game, like against a physical opponent.
Yeah, I mean, probably the most physical game they played, but since then was Minnesota. At Minnesota. Yeah. I mean, Minnesota's physical, but other than that, I mean, it's not like it's been some like major physical battles after that.
Well, the big question is, and you talked about Andy Kotelnicki, is he going to get too cute with his offense? He loves to move Tyler Warren around, put him under center, put him at quarterback, running back, all this stuff. Is he going to get too cute like he did against Boise State when we were talking with Chris? I mean, we just run the ball all night. And they win that game probably by more than 17. Now, they're not going to be able to do that against Notre Dame. I would be shocked if they averaged, north of 4 to 4.5 yards per carry against Notre Dame. But, he just, I wonder if they're just kind of sitting there talking in the meeting rooms like, we got to try to run the ball. We can't get too cute. I don't know. I don't know what the offense game plan is.
Yeah, I think both these teams obviously are going to run the football a lot, but I mean, again, man, both of these teams are ranked really high in turnover margin. They're really good defensively at turning you over. And obviously they're really good. Both of them are really good at not turning the ball over. I mean, Aller's thrown 7 interceptions this entire year.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Which team do you think can win this game, has a better chance of winning this game if nobody makes like the crucial turnover mistakes like that and they're not turning the ball over? Like, which team you think can win just straight up without having any help in the turnover game?
I mean, the turnovers, we talked about it. Like, Penn State averages 1.6 takeaways a game. Notre Dame averages 2.2 takeaways per game. Aller needs to play mistake-free football. We've seen in some of the bigger games against the bigger opponents, he hasn't done that. He may have only thrown 7 interceptions, but he threw a crucial one against Oregon, had a couple turnovers against Ohio State, last year against Ohio State, obviously. So it's just when in the bigger games and against the better opponents, he's struggled a little bit. Now, the penalty side, Notre Dame had penalty issues against Georgia. I mean, that was holding them back a lot. It seemed like they were just going to call, hey, let's just rush the punter all night. I don't care if he gets injured or not. Let's just rush the punter like crazy. But Penn State's a little more disciplined with their penalties so far on the year. So if you get a mistake-free football game and you get, mostly a clean game from the refs, this has the makings of like a 17-14 type game, and it could go either way if it's all mistake-free.
Yeah, and both these teams have been solid special teams wise and stuff. I'd be honest with you, I really don't know the answer to that question in regards to if you play mistakes. Because again, both of them are so good in the turnover margin. You got anything else you want to add before we throw out our game picks?
No, let's get the game picks, man. What do you think on this one?
Man, I am going to go. I've gone back and forth with this one. I just have, and I'm just going to honestly. I think that again, both of these teams, like the Spider-Man meme, as far as looking at one another and how they want to play this game at the line of scrimmage and win this game with physicality. I do think that Penn State has more of the ability to open up a little bit more on offense. But I just think that right now, Notre Dame is the way that they're playing and the way Marcus Freeman is coaching and has this team just dialed all the way in right now and playing above their heads, honestly. I think Notre Dame makes the least amount of mistakes, makes another big play in the special teams game, and they find a way to win this game, like you said, like a 17-14, 20-17, lower scoring. And I think Notre Dame finds a way to get this one. I think that they probably do force, like you mentioned, a turnover from Drew Aller, and they find a way to get this one in a close battle with Penn State.
That's a bummer. That's a bummer for the pod. Usually when Lance picks against Notre Dame, they're in good shape. But I don't usually get picks on Notre Dame games, but this one to me feels pretty similar to that Georgia game. And I think that whichever quarterback deals with pressure the best, that team will have more success. And from what I've seen, I think Riley Leonard deals with pressure. If he gets pressured, he can use his legs a lot more than Drew Aller. And I think that Notre Dame is going to try to get pressure up the middle against Drew Aller and put pressure in his face to make him get out of the pocket a little bit. Excuse me. And I think Notre Dame is going to win the game. I think they're going to head to the national championship. I think that defensive line, obviously with all the attrition they've had, but Gabriel Rubio coming in there for Riley Mills and really showing out, just kind of show some of the depth that they've created on that defensive line. And I think that they're going to force Aller into some mistakes, like you said. I think they're going to be able to contain, not shut down, but contain Katron Allen and Nick Singleton enough to where they get it done in a closer game. So I don't think it's going to be a 13-point spread unless they, get a defensive touchdown or a special teams touchdown again. So, and like Chris said, that's how football is played. I mean, it's a oddly shaped ball and it bounces different ways. And sometimes you just got to catch the breaks and catch the bounces. Let's move on to the Cotton Bowl, 7:30 p.m. on Friday night between Ohio State and Texas. Ohio State 6-point favorites over the Longhorns. Ryan Day 64-6 straight up as a favorite. Both teams played on New Year's Day. Ryan Day's 46-6 on equal rest as his opponent. He's 55-8 after a win. He's 20-9 against ranked opponents. Remind me again why people wanted this guy fired, just because he couldn't beat the team in the maize and blue. Sark at Texas. Well, go ahead. Sark in Texas. He's 1-5 straight up as an underdog, and he's only 4-5 at neutral site games. 3-6 against the spread in those games. 12-11 against ranked opponents. We talked a lot over the past couple episodes, and we just talked with Chris about Texas when they are playing a big opponent like this. The last kind of marquee win they've had was Alabama in week 2 of 2023. So that's a long time ago. And he said that he thinks that Sark is absolutely relishing the fact that they're in the underdog spot, for once.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm going to say this again, too, because we have some people sometimes that get mad at us when we say, like, oh, Sark hasn't won a big game. They've been in big games. Like, again, we're talking about when the deck of cards is stacked evenly or maybe slightly against him. Like, yes, the Big 12 championship game last year against Oklahoma State. That's obviously a big game. But they were favored by like double digits against Oklahoma State. They obviously were a significantly more talented, better football team than Oklahoma State. Okay, Arizona State, yes, that was a college football playoff game and a big game, okay? But they were a double-digit favorite and had significantly more talent across the board than Arizona State. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying those weren't big games and good wins, okay? This game against what looks like to be like an unstoppable Space Force or something, more on that here in a minute with Ohio State, like this game, the Bama game last year in Tuscaloosa where he won and clapped those Bama cheeks in Tuscaloosa, much to my dismay. And that's the type of games that we're talking. Washington in the Sugar Bowl last year. Okay, now we'll move on. So I'll say this, man. I think that Texas, I'm going to start off with this. I think Texas is more like well-equipped across the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball to put up a fight and possibly win this game against Ohio State. Not taking anything away from Oregon. Oregon, again, number one team in the country. They were elite, all that. But I think Texas is better across the – I don't even think it's really a question. I think Texas along the defensive front has more difference makers along the front with Colin Simmons and Trey Moore and Barron Sorrell and Anthony Hill Jr. at the linebacker position. I mean, like I mentioned to Chris a minute ago, Jahdae Barron won the best DB award in the country. They've got elite level talent and great players at every level, similar to how Ohio State is. Ohio State at every level of their defense. Like, it's not that they've just got a dominant defensive line. I mean, Simon at linebacker and obviously their corners and but two of the best safeties in the country. I mean, they've got elite level play at all levels of their defense. So does Texas. So I do think that talent wise, Ohio State really, man, is just, correct me if I'm wrong, they've just really overwhelmed the first two teams that they've played with their talent. I mean, the most talented roster in the country has been playing like a freaking angry, hungry grizzly bear that hasn't eaten in forever. That's how they've been playing. Texas is going to have to match that like intensity. Texas is going to have to go to that borderline like dark place in your head to come out and play like an angry, pissed off like bear that hasn't eaten in months, like Ohio State's been playing. That's just really what they've been doing with the most talented roster in the country.
Yeah. Let's break it down. Let's start there. When Ohio State has the ball, number 6 scoring offense versus number 3 scoring defense. Texas defense is number 12 against the rush. Ohio State, though, we've seen it in the past 2 games, and it's worked magnificently. They clearly want to use that passing game to open up the running game, which is a complete 180 from what they were trying to do the first 12 weeks of the season. And we know that Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, one of the best 1-2 punches in the game. And that's the thing, though. If Ohio State comes out and they can get the ball moving through the air, that will open up that rushing game against that Texas D.
Yeah, and again, I'm just going to say, I don't think that Ohio State is going to have the same success up front. This offensive line, who obviously had issues, we all know it's well documented throughout the year with a lot of the injuries that they had, trying to, use a makeshift, piece things together, different offensive line. They had a lot of time to prepare for the playoffs to be able to try to figure that out. They obviously look like that they have. But again, I think that this Texas defensive front is too talented for
it would help
too good.
if they got off the field, because against Arizona State, they played for 97 plays.
Yep.
Compared to 60 for the Texas offense. So, I mean, get off the field.
Yeah. And I promise you, there's plenty of people listening to this that are going to be like, well, that Texas defense didn't look so tough against Arizona State. I agree. Yeah. They didn't. I have no idea.
Or Clemson.
Oh, yeah, they did. I have no idea what's happened these last couple of weeks. And maybe it is. Maybe it is that they just played better offenses these last 2 weeks, and maybe the Texas defense
maybe
isn't
the
as
SEC
good.
offenses weren't anything to write home about.
Maybe so, and that could be the case. But I don't personally think that. I think this Texas defense does have dudes, and I just think that they're too talented. Like, some people are talking about this. I'm just going to go there. Some people are talking about this game, man, like this is like a David versus Goliath type game. I get it. I mean, I understand because of how Ohio State's been playing. But, dude, the power of your back against the wall, the little old who would have thought the little old underdog story, Texas, with all the talent that they've got. Think about that. That's an elite coaching staff there in Austin. Yeah. They've got some dogs on that team. And we've seen Ohio State, when you have a bunch of really talented football players who feel slighted, and who have that us against the world mentality, the Ohio against the world stuff that Ohio State does, that's exactly the type of stuff Texas is going to be doing this week. Now, can they do anything about it? Can they do anything about it? We're going to see. So where do you want to start, on offensive, defensive side?
Yeah, just continuing on when Ohio State has the ball, like I mentioned, with Chris, I've been, I guess you can call it a Will Howard hater this year. And in my defense, he hasn't looked like he has the last 2 weeks throughout the regular season. And maybe they were holding him back. Like you said, maybe they were hiding him a little bit, keeping some of this stuff close to the vest for the playoffs. I don't think that's the case. I don't know what was going on, but he's absolutely playing his butt off in the playoffs. Like I said, 315 a game and a 98.2 QBR. That's out of 100, folks. This isn't like a 158.3 quarterback rating. This is a 98.2 QBR rating. Big question is can Hill and Simmons create pressure off the edge?
Yeah, I think they can. And I think that they can get pressure up the middle too. But again, the way that Howard has been they've been scheming it to where they get the ball out of his hands quick.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just dropping back. He's not standing back there forever. Even on some of those deep balls. I mean, it's like, 1, 2, 3, plant that back foot, let it rip. Obviously that helps when you've got Jeremiah Smith and Ibuka in that bunch that can get open like they can, that you're not having to wait for them to get open. But can the Texas DBs, can they hold up? It's going to be a great matchup there. I think that this is going to – I just don't think that Ohio State's going to be able to line up with Henderson and Judkins and be able to run the ball necessarily as well as they ran it these first 2 games. But really, those 2 guys, it's not that they're doing kind of like Notre Dame did against Georgia or kind of like Penn State's done with Allen and Singleton. It's not your 4 or 5 yard type the ones that just slowly, death by 1,000 cuts. It's not that type of run game that Ohio State's been using. It's explosive plays. You look at it and Judkins and Henderson may have a 2-yard run, a 3-yard run, maybe a 4-yard run, 2-yard run. Then all of a sudden, boom, Henderson goes for 30, 50 or more. They've got to limit the explosive plays for Ohio State. Ohio State has come out in the first quarter in these first 2 playoff games and has put together 2 of the best quarters of football you'll ever want to see.
And basically, honestly, it's the first drive. I mean, too, they just absolutely blitzed Oregon. They did the same thing to Tennessee. If they can come out and do that same thing against Texas, you're going to know real quick.
Agreed.
We're in trouble. If Texas bows up and forces a 3-and-outer, gets the ball, punted by the 50-yard line, that's a win for Texas, obviously.
Yeah, I think if Texas can come out against this Ohio State offense early on and obviously not get just completely blitzed like Ohio State did in those first 2 games, we're going to know that we're in for a war or not early on. And so can they get pressure on Will Howard? They've got to be able to slow down something. And I think it starts there. They've got to be able to, because I think that Texas with their pass rushers, I think they're okay with I think Texas believes they've got enough difference makers on that D front that if this game turns into Will Howard trying to drop back and throw the ball a billion times, that I think that they believe that they can get enough pressure, make enough plays, maybe force a turnover or something, that they feel good about that. Where I just don't know, again, I just don't think Jeremiah Smith is. We've talked about it too many times. I know everybody in the country is constantly talking about this guy, and rightfully so. We've been saying he's uncoverable.
Yeah.
Well, we've got the guy that won the Thorpe Award for the best defensive back in the country, Jahdae Barron. You got to think he's going to be going up against him some. Makuba, the other corner who's really good, who transferred in from Clemson. Mm-hmm. You got to think he's going to be matched up with him some too. But again, dude, even if they can somehow slow him down, you still got Ibuka. You still have got Tate. That Texas front is going to have to. The best pass defense you can have is when the quarterback's on his back or when he's rushed and has to rush his throws. And can they do that? Because obviously we've seen when Ohio State has looked the most mortal and human this year is when they faced dominant defensive fronts that were able to get there. Tennessee had a dominant defensive front, and they weren't able to do anything about it.
Yeah.
Oregon has a good defensive front, maybe not as dominant as the Tennessee defensive front or the Texas defensive front. They weren't able to do anything about it.
Yeah. Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka, 70 catches each. Carnell Tate with 43 catches. That Texas secondary we saw in that Clemson game, for some reason, very susceptible, but they are a bunch of ball hawks. Mm-hmm. Barron and Makuba both have 5 picks. You got hard-hitting safety Michael Taft back there. So they do have a good secondary. For whatever reason, like we mentioned, they've just been inconsistent over the past, month or so, 3 or 4 games. So let's switch to the other side of the ball. When Texas has the ball, this is almost the tougher side for Texas, in my opinion. I mean, you talk about how when Ohio State has the ball, trying to stop them, but trying to do something against this Ohio State defense, who's number 1 scoring defense in the country. They're only allowing 12 points per game. They're number 1 in yards allowed. They're number 2 in the red zone scoring defense. They're number 2 in rush defense, which Texas has struggled. They've been wishy-washy and been flip-floppy on running the ball. They were great against Clemson. They were terrible against Arizona State. Trey Wisner's got over 100,000 yards. He didn't even play till game 5. So that's pretty impressive, to show you what they can do on the ground. But and Jaden Blue, he's a home run threat, but I just don't know what kind of Texas run game you're going to get, especially against this Ohio State defense. And that's where it all starts with me.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that outside of Oregon, this is the best offense that Ohio State has faced as far as the overall collection of talent across the board on a single offense. It's probably, outside of Penn State, the best offensive line, as long as Texas, we don't know the health of if Texas is going to be somewhat healthy on the offensive line, it's the best offensive line they faced. But, man, I said it last game and I'll say it again. I said it going into the Rose Bowl. People were asking, can Ohio State duplicate that performance they had against Tennessee against Oregon? Obviously they did and probably did more. But the thing that can be duplicated is everything you just talked about. The thing that can be duplicated is this Ohio State defense. That defensive front, who is arguably the best in the country, Cody Simon at linebacker, Ransom and Downs at safety. I mean, arguably the 2 best safeties in college football. Just unbelievable that Oregon, with their skilled players, just literally couldn't get open. And negative whatever yards rushing. You got to think that Sark, being the great offensive mind that he is, there's going to be some things that they're going to be able to find to have some success in. But what kind of adjustments will Jim Knowles and that defense make? I agree with you on the part of this is where I have trouble seeing without a Quinn Ewers legacy game, where does Texas find ways to be able to score?
Yeah.
We saw how much they struggled in the first game against Georgia this year. As far as overall talent on a defense, Ohio State has more, but this is the better comparison. When Texas played Texas A&M, the talent that Texas A&M has on the defensive side of the ball. When they played against Georgia, the talent that Georgia has on the defensive side of the ball. This is the only thing, and again, Ohio State's better than those 2 teams on the defensive side. We saw Texas struggle. And, dude, 2 years in a row, as good as an offensive mind that Sark is, Texas's woes, man, in the red zone is a problem. And I don't know how many times Texas will be able to be in the red zone, but to make it to the national championship game, for Texas to be in the national championship game, they've got to score 6 and punch it in the end zone instead of kick field goals.
Yeah, and we just talked about, Ohio State number 2 in red zone scoring defense. So that does not bode well for Texas. Like you mentioned with Quinn Ewers, when he's got the ball in his hands and he's going to make a play, he's going up against the number 1 pass defense and number 1 team in sack percentage. It's weird that Ohio State only has 9 interceptions on defense all year. So I know Ewers has kind of been prone to, make a couple mistakes here and there, like he did against A&M and whatnot, like he did against Georgia. We talked about it with Chris at all. In your opinion, do we see any of Arch Manning at all? Like we saw in that Georgia game, that first one, Sark was like, I need to do something to shake the team up because it's 23-0 right now. And he put in Arch Manning. Like, I don't know if we get to that point, but is this like, a situation where like a Nick Saban in the national championship game, like you got a good backup. Like, let's try the backup out if we're down early 14 points.
Yeah, I think that's the only way that we do see him. I think it has to be going bad for that to happen. I know Arch has played. He's started a couple of games and when Quinn was out. But I think it has to be going really bad for them offensively for us to see that. It's obvious he wants to ride or die with Quinn. Obviously, Quinn made him look really good against Arizona State there in that second half where he made the plays there in the fourth quarter and in overtime like he did. So, again, this is just going to come down to Sark's teams. Texas has been this way. The games that they have either lost or drastically struggled in, Texas can't run the football. So, can they run the football? Chris talked about that too. Texas is going to have to be able to run the football with Wisner and Blue. That offensive line is going to have to be able to get a little bit of push. I don't know that they're going to be able to without help in the quarterback run game. But to your point, maybe we see a little bit of arch to try to maybe keep them off balance a little bit with that. Yeah. No idea. And Texas is going to have to hit some explosive plays in the passing game. They're going to have to, which is obviously hard to do against Downs and Ransom back there at the safety positions for Ohio State. That's just what they're going to have to do on offense to be able to manufacture and score points in this game.
Yep. All right, let's get to game picks. I'm going to give out a best bet here. It's one I made last on New Year's Day. Watching that Oregon team with Dylan Gabriel and those receivers struggle to do anything on offense, and then watching Texas and kind of just they have the weapons, but they just haven't produced this year. And like we talked about, Matthew Golden being their best receiver, he's a solid player, but he's not a Tez Johnson, anything like that. Quinn Ewers is a solid quarterback, but in my mind, he's not Dylan Gabriel. He's not accurate with the ball like Dylan Gabriel is. Ewers needs to play mistake-free football. They give the ball away 1.6 times per game, which is shocking for a team, in the top 5, top 10. We're talking about Notre Dame and Penn State taking the ball away that much and more. You're talking about giving the ball away that much. Penn State, or Texas on the penalties, they're 96th in the country in penalties per game, where Ohio State's 7th in the country, only averaging 4 penalties per game. I just think it's too much. It's too much for Texas to overcome with Ohio State. I know the spread is 6 right now. I got Ohio State at -5.5 on New Year's Day. That is a best bet. I would still take it at 6 because this does, in my opinion, this has a chance to be another one of those games where we see in the semifinals. We're to the Final Four. We've seen a lot of semifinal games in the college football playoff era. This has another opportunity to be just a ugly game where people are talking online. See, this is blah blah blah. This terrible product and just blowout. I don't know. I just think Ohio State's on a roll. I think they're playing too well. And we've been saying it for a couple weeks. If they bring that type of game, if they bring their A game, they're going to win the national championship. I think they can bring their A-, B+ game against Texas and win the game still. But I think they're going to continue playing that A game. I think they're going to win by more than a touchdown.
Yeah, I think that my game pick here, I think that if both teams play their A game, I think Ohio State's A game is better. Texas is going to have to be able to force a couple of turnovers, maybe a sack fumble on Will Howard, interception type to get pressure. Defense is going to have to get pressure on Howard. Obviously, they're going to have to limit the explosive plays. They've been killing. They killed Tennessee and Oregon with the big plays. They're going to have to limit that. And on offense, they're going to have to hit explosive plays, and they need to be able to run the football. Again, I'm just of the belief that Texas has way, way, way too much talent across the board on both sides of the ball at every position group. Every position group, they do have a star. And I think they can play with Ohio State, and I think this is going to be a classic. I do. I think Texas has enough about them, and this coaching staff has enough about them. They're not going to just roll out there and just allow Ohio State just to blast them like they've done the first 2 games against Tennessee and Oregon. But at the end of the day, I just think that Ohio State, they're just too good along that defensive front right now. They're too good defensively. I think the matchup of the Texas offense versus the Ohio State defense, I think that's too much to overcome. I think it's going to be a really good football game, and I'm going to take Ohio State something like 27. I mean, I think it's going to be close to where that line is, like a 27-20 type game, 31-24 type game. I don't have a best bet in this one. I just think the Buckeyes get it done. They make it to the national championship game, and we have a classic on our hands in the Cotton Bowl.
Okay, that's it for us. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Appreciate Chris Vannini from The Athletic for joining on with us and talking some ball. As always, follow us on all the socials and follow us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Subscribe, share with your friends. We appreciate it. We'll be back to recap these games later on in the week. And then after that, national championship. It's hard to believe we only got 3 college football games left this year. So it went by fast. It went by super fun, though. So we'll be back soon.